Hey everybody. At the beginning of this episode, you're going to hear us ask you to send us hot takes about Exposé, which is the episode we'll be watching next week, but we forgot to give you a deadline. So if you could please send us whatever you want to say by the morning of Monday, November 11th, we will be recording that night. Thanks so much.
Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Sammy Roth.
And I'm Rosie Murphy, and this is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
This week we've got Season 3, Episode 13, The Man from Tallahassee. It is a Locke episode.
Famously, John Locke blows up the submarine in this episode, preventing Jack and Juliet from leaving the island. We also find out how he ended up in that wheelchair.
And we've got more from our conversation with Andrew Divoff, who plays Mikhail Bakunin.
Let's do it.
We always start on The Hatch with our hot takes about the week's episode. But this week, before we do that, we've got an ask for you. Next week, we'll be watching Exposé, which is, of course, the famous or infamous, depending on how you want to look at it, Nikki and Paulo tell-all episode.
We know how divisive this episode is, and it seems to have actually aged really well, and a lot of people seem to have sort of come around to loving it. So we would love for you to send us your hot take on Exposé, arguing either this is a horrible episode of Lost or this is a brilliant episode of Lost.
Yep, you got to tell us it's either horrible or brilliant. We don't want any middling takes. These are hot takes. You can call us and leave us a voice message at this number, 9546-DHARMA. That is +1, American number, 9546-DHARMA.
If you prefer, you can also record a voice memo on your phone and send it as a message to our Facebook page.
And that is, of course, facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast, where I'm sure you already follow us.
It'd be great if you could keep it to about a minute.
So please do that. In the meantime, this week's hot takes. We watched The Man from Tallahassee. Rosie, what is your hot take?
Yes, so in the flashback in The Man from Tallahassee, early on, we see John Locke open the door to a young man named Peter Talbot. Peter reveals that his mother has begun dating a man who makes Peter suspicious. And somehow, Peter has gone and obtained this man's medical records and found out that John Locke donated him a kidney. Now, you and I are both journalists. We're fortunate to have many friends who are journalists. We have a fair amount of experience getting information via public records or records that are accessible to the public. Medical records are not such a thing. So I put this out to a few friends who are journalists and asked, is there any conceivable way that Peter Talbot got this information without, breaking the law? And the conclusion seems to be no. So just FYI, medical records, not really a thing that you can just go get, especially if this man is a con man and he's not using his real name. So, should have had some journalists in the writer's room.
Moral of the story of Rosie's hot take, Peter is a lawbreaker and you should not feel bad when he dies. That's what you're saying, right?
I feel very, very bad that he dies. What's your hot take?
So this is kind of an obvious one, but man, am I mad at Locke after watching this episode. I mean, it's a great Locke episode. It's a great Locke story. But fuck, Jack and Juliet were gonna get off the island in less than an hour.
Yep.
And he blew up the sub. And we'll talk about why he did it. He had, there's a logical explanation for what's going on in Locke's head here. But at the end of the day, it comes back to Locke, wanting to stay on the island, not wanting anyone to come and try to take him off the island. And, in his mind, that, personal desire of his overrides, it seems, the right of Jack and Juliet and everyone else to be able to leave. And it's just extremely selfish.
Yeah, and that's something Ben makes really clear in this episode, right? He is able to reveal, at least, somewhere in John Locke's mix of motivations, is not this altruistic, I'm protecting the island, I'm protecting all of us. It's, you don't want to leave because you're afraid of your father, which is sort of terrifying and sad, but you're afraid that you might end up back in a wheelchair. You have all of these very, very personal objections to leaving this place. And that means nobody else gets to leave either.
Yeah, it's hard to have a lot of I mean not hard to have sympathy for Locke. Like I get it, but man, he's basically the villain right now.
Yeah, I agree.
At least from the perspective of like every other survivor of Oceanic 815.
Yeah, I mean, he's the enemy of everyone except Ben, who is, the big bad right now. So I'm not sure how well that sets John Locke up for.
It doesn't.
No.
And no, you're right. It is everyone except Ben, because Ben says, the submarine is important to many of the others who want to know that they have at least the right to leave. At least Ben says that. I mean, I guess we don't know whether we fully believe it.
But immediately thereafter, he says, it's important that they think that even if it's not true.
Yeah.
Or something to that effect. Like, he knows this is a sham.
Right. And as we'll see in Juliet's next flashback, when she asks to leave, he basically just says no.
Right.
Yeah, there's so much, I mean, moving on from the hot take, just from the perspective of, like, watching Ben and Locke interact, this is an incredible episode.
Oh, my goodness, yes.
Where do you want to start?
Well, I guess right at the beginning when John walks into Ben's bedroom and confronts him at gunpoint.
John! Shh! Keep your voice down. All right.
And they have this phenomenal exchange where Ben reveals how much he knows about John Locke, and, scenes sort of cut in and out. But eventually, I mean, the bulk of the episode that takes place between the two of them is just the two of them in that room. And ultimately, it builds to John Locke accusing Ben of cheating. You're cheating, you and your people. You shouldn't be using electricity. You shouldn't be able to leave. You're somehow like not honoring the island the way you ought to be. And Ben
it's a fascinating accusation.
Yeah, it really, really is. And I think, and then Ben goes on to sort of call him on what Ben sees as his bullshit in terms of you think you're honoring the island and instead you're selfish like the rest of us.
And he says you really don't even know what you're talking about. He's very condescending. He says, you'll learn eventually, but like, this is nonsense.
Right. Right. And I mean, do you think John believes this, right? I mean, he does believe somewhere in him that this is not the way things ought to be done on the island.
Oh, hell yeah. Hell yeah.
It's unclear what he thinks ought to be. I
mean, I think the implication is that he thinks they ought to be like, living in the jungle, subsisting.
Hunter-gatherer style?
Yeah. I mean, this is Locke the boar hunter, I think.
Yeah.
At the same time, he loves that leftover chicken.
Yeah, he does. I mean,
also, just Locke going into Ben's fridge and eating his leftovers is hilarious.
After 3 months of subsistence, I think I would probably do the same. Oh, geez.
It reminds me of what Michael Emerson told us last year about what he loved doing those scenes with Terry O'Quinn, that it just, I think the way he put it was that it always felt like there was so much at stake philosophically, even if you couldn't ever quite put your finger on what specifically was at stake. That it just felt like this, their words mattered so much.
Yeah, they're so deliberate.
Yeah, and this episode has so many classic bits of dialogue between the two of them, like the...
Picture a box. You know something about boxes, don't you, John? What if I told you that somewhere on this island there's a very large box, and whatever you imagined, whatever you wanted to be in it, when you opened that box, there it would be.
And then there's the... you already mentioned Locke's speech, your hypocrites, your Pharisees,
mm-hmm.
And then...
There's the classic sort of Ben asides, like...
No, John, unfortunately we don't have a code for there's a man in my closet with a gun to my daughter's head. Although we obviously should.
It's one of the all-time great lines. And then the whole...
Because I'm in a wheelchair and you're not.
I don't know, I think one of the most fascinating questions is... Because, we know what this is building up to, right? I mean, Ben he definitely recognizes that Locke is special, but he also sees him as a threat. And I think that's, that's kind of layered throughout here, and it will build to the tension of Ben, shooting Locke and leaving him for dead at the end of this season. But it sort of seems, when Ben says that I want to help you because I'm in the wheelchair and you're not, that that there is still that layer of deception or manipulation underneath where, yeah, Ben wants to help him because he knows he's special, but does he really want to help him that much, or is it a keep your enemies close situation?
Yeah, I was going to say pretty much the same thing. I mean, I think Ben recognizes surely that John is special and that, something has happened to and for him that has not happened to and for Ben, that Ben's seemingly never seen. This miraculous healing. And so he
seems legitimately fascinated by how it happened.
Yeah.
He's asking Locke, was it immediate? Did you just stand up right away?
Right. Yeah, wants to know all the details, wants to presumably try to sort of puzzle out what happened. And there are no answers. I mean, there's, the island healed him, and that's kind of all. It's a miracle, right? It's the point of a miracle is that it's not to be explained rationally. But no, I think Ben knows that John is important somehow, and he sees him partly as an opportunity and partly as a threat. So I think he fears a little bit this independent streak that John has going, where he's willing to operate, in very much separately from the rest of his group. He's willing to sort of pursue his own ends just because he's interested in them. And for Ben, somebody like that is very dangerous, right? So while half of Ben might want to win him over and bring him over to their side because he's somehow powerful, I think the other half of Ben is like, if we bring this guy along, is he going to try to overthrow me? Is he going to try to supplant me? Is he going to blow up my submarine? Yeah, even though of course Ben wanted that, but what if it's not the submarine next time?
Yeah, I think the way you phrased it, that he sees him as an opportunity and a threat, is interesting. I'm curious, what do you think Ben sees as being the opportunity in Locke?
I mean, he does have. I think it's the wheel. I think it's the healing. I think it's the wheelchair. Something happened for John that Ben knows about and doesn't understand. And I think any time when someone is able to sort of have some experience on the island that the others have not been able to have, that's an immediate source of fascination. It's like a resource that they need to possess. Even if they don't really understand it.
Right, I guess that's what's implicit in I'm in the wheelchair and you're not. Whatever happened to Locke, Ben wants to know how it can happen to him or to the other members of their tribe.
Right. Which in a moment that is really cool, John totally calls him on and says, you're not healing as fast as you think you should. I can see that you're afraid, and the reason you want to know so much about this is that you want to basically appropriate that experience or that technology or whatever it might be so that you can have this miracle too. And
I think that the idea that this is transactional for Ben, that he there's something he wants out of Locke, and he's got to weigh that against the threat that Locke poses to his leadership, is interesting. I mean, of course, it's making me think, just about the calculation that Ben makes at the end of this year where, after they go and visit Jacob, and he realizes that Locke really might be able to commune with Jacob in a way that he can't. I think that at that point that, the threat overrides whatever value Locke might have to him.
Yeah.
Which is why he pulls the trigger. I also think that, I mean, where we're going with this Anthony Cooper storyline, supposedly it's this challenge for Locke to help him overcome, but what it is it's a trap. I mean, because as we know from the coming episodes, Ben doesn't really think that Locke is going to be able to kill his father, and he sort of set him up in this way to diminish him until Richard comes along and helps with the information about Sawyer. So, yeah, I mean, I think you're right. He definitely he just wants something out of Locke. He doesn't really want to help him. He wants to extract something from him and then, cast him aside.
Well, yeah, and I mean, the tough thing about Locke is that he doesn't seem to need any help, with the exception of, Anthony Cooper sort of seems to be his only weakness, and I could see how Ben would look at him and see that, Whereas, I mean, with Jack, Ben was able to offer him something very practical, right? Like, I can get you off this island. And Jack was able to ask for that thing. But if Ben just said to John, like, what do you want in exchange? What would John even say?
Yeah.
You know, so Ben, in order to facilitate this transaction, Ben really has to, you know, sort of look inside John as much as he can and try to guess at what he wants or needs. And I think to mixed results.
Yeah, I don't know that we really know at this point to really see what Ben's strategy is for, you know, learning how it is that Locke was able to heal or what's special about him. I mean, he asks him,
right,
which doesn't, you know, go anywhere. So I think it's something that we should be watchful of the next few weeks. Does it, you know, what is Ben doing in order to you know, try to take whatever Locke has for himself or for his people?
Right. Yeah, and I don't know that it's quite as specific as that. Like, I want to take what you have, but, like, he needs to understand it so that he can maintain control. Right? Because anything that happens outside of his understanding is a threat to his control.
Right, and as we kind of see later with the conversation that Locke has with Richard, the fact that Locke healed is this source of, like, inspiration to some of the others, and it's something that Ben can't provide to them.
Right.
That only Locke can.
Right. And does, eventually.
and does. I do think that, I mean, this is part of it, but just the sort of the tenuousness of Ben's leadership is something that I don't think we've really been clued in on before now.
It's becoming very apparent. Between Juliet undermining him-ish at the beginning of the episode at the beginning of this season, and, you know, Ben sums it up himself in this episode and says, like, I had to make a deal with Jack. I had to let him go. Like, do you know how embarrassing that is for me? I mean, he's saying it himself. He's on shaky ground.
He is, and he says that it would be, you know, and it would be just as bad to break his promise to Jack, because then his people would see that he broke his word.
Right, he's a liar and a cheat, but
speaking of Ben being a liar and a cheat, I love that I think it's so telling that he continues, although we don't know this is a lie yet, but he continues to lie and insist that he was born on the island, because I think that in his mind that gives him more legitimacy that he is truly a native, and I suspect that he keeps saying that because probably most of the others, Richard aside, probably don't know that not to be the case.
Before we totally leave Anthony Cooper, I mean, holy God, what a good reveal at the end.
Oh, God.
Oh, my goodness. I had totally forgotten that was the final shot of this episode, and it was like, ooh, I watched it right before I went to bed, and it was like too much adrenaline to do anything but like sit in my room.
I had not forgotten, and I had pretty much the same reaction.
Oh, it's a lightning bolt kind of thing.
Right, especially after this episode where it's like just when you think Anthony Cooper can't get any worse, like you find out that he's very possibly a murderer, and then he attempts to kill Locke like within 30 seconds.
Right. Well, and we also find out that he tried to kill Locke, I mean, very transparently, and killed this young man. And, I mean, we don't know that 100%, but it's heavily implied.
Well, he did break the law by stealing those records, but otherwise... otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, now, Anthony Cooper is definitely evolving from a dark presence here to an absolute evil man.
Yeah. No, and I think we had to learn about what he did to Locke, how he pushed him out the window in order to justify the episode later where Sawyer just, like up and strangles him. Do you remember, by the way, that later at the end of season 5, we find out one more little bit about Locke's fall?
Didn't Jacob go to visit him in the hospital?
No, Jacob heals him when he hits the ground.
Jacob heals him when he hits the ground, that's right.
Yeah. So it was fun to watch this and just, think about circling back to that moment later. I mean, that truly, that is why Ben is so afraid of this guy. I mean, he doesn't understand what happens, and I think you would call that Ben's worst fear, that Jacob, who, he supposedly has, been in communications with and is distributing his orders, but in reality he's never even seen the guy, and he feels so neglected by him, showed up to save Locke's life in his moment of greatest need. I mean, man, that's exactly what Ben would be afraid of.
Does Ben know that, or does he ever find that out?
That Locke healed Jacob? Or Jacob healed Locke?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
But I mean, is Jacob ending up in the real world and healing Locke at his moment of greatest need? How different is that from the island healing Locke after the plane crash?
I mean, I guess it's about the same. If Ben wants to understand what happens to why Locke was able to heal when he wasn't, and if that also makes Locke seem like a threat to Ben, I would just mean that the fact that it was literally just Jacob out there, healing Locke personally, that would probably be the thing that would freak Ben out the most.
No, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree, because that's the ultimate threat to his power, right? It's not so much a coup from his people would very much be a threat, but the ultimate threat is that someone else actually has a direct line to Jacob.
Right, which he just claims to.
Right.
Yeah.
Ooh. Anyway.
I just to go back for a second to Locke and Ben, I did want to comment that I was wondering after, the moment when Locke goes into the bedroom and wakes up Ben, I was wondering, when was the last time? When was the last time we saw them together? And it would have been in the hatch.
It was.
Yeah, and so I looked it back up, and literally the last conversation we see them having together, which was probably the last one because it was shortly before the Michael shooting incident, is this conversation where Locke says to Henry Gale at the time, why would your own people want to kill you? Because Henry had said, if I get out of here, they're going to kill me anyway.
Right.
And Henry says, because the man in charge, he'll kill me because I failed my mission. Locke asks, what mission? And Ben says, I was on my way here I was coming for you, John. I was coming to get you, presumably because you're special, although he doesn't say that. And I just think that's even though we wouldn't have known it at the time, that sets up so fabulously what transpires between them this episode and really what's going to be the thread between them for the rest of the show.
Right.
That John is special, and what does that mean for John, and what does that mean for Ben, and what are they going to do about it? That's the thread that takes us all the way through the scene where Ben ultimately does kill him.
Oof. What a journey.
It's an amazing journey, and it's fun to see it start in this episode. Do you have any hindsights?
Very minor. Early in the flashback, actually in the same scene where Peter Talbot comes to John's door, he is watching Expose on TV, which is a fun little breadcrumb leading us into next week, which of course I can't imagine a viewer just casually noticing, but
I totally missed it.
Yeah, no, he is. Do you have any hindsights?
Well, I don't know if this is sort of an inter-episode hindsight, but the only complaint I have this episode, and it's such a minor one, Ben capitalizing on Locke wanting to blow up the sub is an awesome storyline, but Locke just says one thing at the end of the episode that I just can't for the life of me, looking back at what had transpired before, figure out how it makes sense. Locke says to Ben at the end when they're talking about how this is what Ben wanted, he says, let me find the line. He says, that's why you left the C4 in Saeed's bag, because you wanted me to make it happen. And I just, I would love it if someone out there could help me understand this if I'm not getting the timeline straight, because I can't figure out how Ben could have possibly known there was C4 in Saeed's bag, and left it there in whatever way that Locke means that, because the way this episode plays out is Saeed and Kate get captured by, Ryan Price and some of the other thugs. And then the next scene we see after that is Locke creeping into Ben's bedroom and waking him up and immediately holding him hostage. At which point Ben has, basically no agency after that to, make a decision about whether there should be C4 in Saeed's bag because he doesn't even know about it and he's being held hostage. I would just say, and even if you allow for maybe there was a couple minutes between those two scenes, I was really thinking about this, maybe Ryan Price calls Ben and wakes him up and says, hey, we captured Saeed and he's got C4. But at that point, Ben wouldn't have known that Locke was even there. So even if Ben had somehow thought, oh, leave it in the bag and then like gone back to sleep, like, I don't know, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Am I missing something?
This could also be a case of John wanting to see patterns where there are none, and mistaking coincidence for fate, as it were.
Ooh.
You know, like it's very possible that this was not intentional at all on Ben's part, but John wants to see all these pieces fall into place, and so he does.
I like that explanation a lot.
I think that simplifies things.
So should we go to the Andrew Divoff?
I think we should. If you have missed our last couple of episodes, we have been talking with Andrew Divoff, who of course played Mikhail Bakunin. This is our third part of the interview with Andrew, and we're actually not going to return to him until Mikhail reappears in the season finale. So this will be the last we'll hear from him for a little while.
Yeah.
The moment that, the one moment that to me is the most revealing about the character that we haven't talked about is when he's having that conversation with Ben at the end of when Ben is giving him the order to not only kill Charlie but to kill his own people. He's skeptical, and Ben is explaining, well, these are Jacob's orders, and this is for the good of our people. And he asks Ben, you know, who's been telling him all of these lies. He lied and said the station was flooded. He lied and said there was nothing down there. He lied and told him he wasn't, you know, didn't tell him he was jamming his own people. Anyway, Mikhail says, why not trust me? And Ben says, I'm trusting you now. And there's this big pause that they hold on you, and then finally, you know, you nod, you're going to carry out the orders. I just thought that was so interesting that you asked him, why not trust me, that you kind of, it seemed to me that you felt slighted, that, you know, you should have been in on it.
Absolutely. Yes. And I mean, as much as by that time Mikhail had shown his faith, if you will, and his faith to the cause, and the fact that again that all of these lies, as they turned out, would have been kept from him, and that they weren't shared with him. I mean, he had shown. I mean, the question is why not trust me? I've already shown you that I'm faithful. It's sort of that. It's a very religious hierarchy, isn't it? It's faith. And then it's questioning. Why me? Sort of a Jobian question of why am I going through all of this shit? Why put me through this shit? Why not trust me? Why not let me be one of the chosen few? Why not let the light shine on me? Yeah. So and again, this sense of offense and being offended, but ultimately carrying it out because faith must roll on.
Probably the thing that's most famous about your character is that you seemingly die twice. First when you walk through the sonic fence and blood comes out your ears, and then when you get shot with a harpoon and then come back.
Right.
I know there's a grenade that goes off in your hand at the end. Do you have is there any part of you that thinks maybe he survived that somehow?
Of course.
And got out? Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, because you don't really see the body or anything.
Right.
What would Mikhail be doing if he got off the island and was just out there in the world? What do you think he would even do?
I think he would have gone back to his back to the flame.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think he would be back in the flame and waiting. Sort of almost like a spider in a corner, just weaving a web, knowing that something will come by and fall into it. Yeah. But I think it would have been just another day for him. He would have been back at the flame.
Did you feel bad at all about being the one to kill Charlie, this fan favorite character, or was that fun for you?
I did. And both as Andrew and as I didn't question it as Mikhail. Again, total faith in the writers and the producers. But I do remember coming on set after reading that the night before and thinking to myself, "Holy shit, man!" And coming on set and seeing Dominic cross the lot, and I just saw him, and I thought to myself, should I take a left or a right and walk somewhere else? And I decided not to, just walk straight ahead, looked at him, and I was shaking my head, and I went like that.
You kind of put your hands to your side there.
I did,
Yeah.
and Dominic says, "So right, Andrew, so right." Oh man! And I gave him a big hug, and I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to say, and I saw Evangeline as well, and I just kind of shook my head, and she smiled.
Oh, right, because she and Dominic were a couple at the time.
They were at
yeah.
the time, and a beautiful couple too, just two beautiful souls, and it. So I looked at her, and I didn't, and I fully expected her to give me the hate look, and just sort of spurned me, but she as well. She was so sweet. She just kind of smiled, gave me a hug, and we got on with it. And incidentally, I signed a lot of posters over this weekend, where the lost posters that were brought to me.
Really?
And, yes. And though my character wasn't included in the poster, I always sign whenever I see Charlie, whenever I see Dominic's sort of photo as part of the group. I always write there, "Sorry, Charlie."
Oh.
And I write my name. So.
It's very sweet, actually. How well, that's interesting. That raises looking at this, the scope of your career. You've obviously been in a lot of different stuff. How does Lost compare with other things you've done?
Man. A life changer. Very few roles are life changers, and this was certainly one of them. I just knew it was magical. First of all, magical first and foremost because of the place, and the place wouldn't be magical without the people, and I mean the people of in this case on this lost island of Oahu, and there's a word, Polynesian word, a Hawaiian word that means family, and that's ohana, and I truly feel that I have a big ohana there. And I was treated with respect, and likewise gave it back to my Hawaiian brothers and sisters. But this role, and Mikhail, and just his character, the profundity of his character, and this nobility that was brought to the fore by the writers in Mikhail, for me, was a life changer. And I kid you not, Sammy. The first 7 days that I was there, every morning I would show up on set, and Evangeline would say to me, "Did you sleep last night?" And I said, "No, I didn't." I was so fucking excited to be there, man, and I was pinching myself all the time. I would get to my room and I'd do all my studying, and I was really, I have a sort of a way that I study. I will read it, I will ingest and digest it. I will write it down, and then I will put it on. I will record it, the whole thing, and listen to it copious amount of times, and then I will record it again and omit all of my dialogue, and so that I can do my dialogue, and I play all the other characters in the scene, and so after doing, I would say, maybe 3 to 4 hours of studying a day. Even though I knew the stuff, I would try to go to sleep, and I couldn't. For 7 days, I didn't sleep. Honest, man. And I told Evangeline, I said, "You know what? I think I just need to be sort of happy that I was at least sort of, recumbent. I was laying down. I was looking at the ceiling, and I'm thinking to myself, well, you know what? At least I'm horizontal. I'm not standing up. I guess I'm kind of resting." But I was so excited about being there, and so I was literally pinching myself, and then I really it's sort of as if I was just existing until I got to the set. When I got to the set, I was electrified. I was charged. I was ready to go. I wasn't tired. Didn't need coffee. I was there in a place I wanted to be, and doing a thing I wanted to do. Playing a character that, for me, is a life changer, and a character I will always love.
The other thing I thought was really interesting here is the idea that, if Mikhail had survived the grenade or the final, the events of the finale of this season, that Andrew thinks he would have just gone back to the flame and just kind of hung out and waited for another thing to happen. I mean, it makes sense, but it just seems like, you know, what a soldier, what a thing for a soldier to do, right? Is like go back to base and see what happens next.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense except for the fact that the flame blew up, but
well,
but I like the sentiment otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the thoughtfulness that he's just clearly put into this character and the dedication to his craft that he, talking about re-recording the dialogue here without his lines so that he could practice it, and just, how bad he felt about seeing, Dominic and Evangeline on the set. Like,
yeah.
What a true professional, and he feels it. I love how it's so clear that he just feels this character and his actions.
Agree.
Good guy. I look forward to sharing the last part of this interview at the end of the season.
Me too.
So we will be back next week. As we mentioned up top, it will be expose, and we would really, really love to hear your hot takes about the episode.
Yeah, we honestly want a bunch of hot takes, so please call us and share your thoughts.
Yep, if it was a horrible episode, tell us why you think that. A brilliant episode, tell us why you think that. 9546 Dharma is the number. You can find it on our Twitter account as well, which is at The Hatch Podcasts.
Next week, we will also have the first part of an interview with Ivan Asquith, who is, was at one time sort of a scholar writing on Lost, but now is an industry professional who's worked on shows like Veronica Mars. And Sammy, you had a really interesting chat with him, right?
Yeah, I did. Veronica Mars, he actually helped do the fundraising campaign for the revival of that show, which was super, super successful, and now he's a producer on Mystery Science Theater 3000, and just kind of like a really different and unique perspective on the television industry and on Lost, so you'll want to stick around and hear that over the next couple weeks.
As always, you can talk with us. We are on Facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast and on Twitter at The Hatch Podcast.
Our theme music is by Andy G. Cohen. Our cover art is by Danny Roth.
We'll talk to you next week.
Namaste.